Chapter 13 of Weapons of Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Weapons of Mystery by Joseph Hocking. Chapter 13. A Mesmerist's Spell. I found on entering the breakfast room that my presence caused no surprise. Neither did any of the guests regard me suspiciously. It had gone abroad that I had gone out to find Kaffar, but was unable to do so. And as Voltaire had publicly spoken of Kaffar's luggage being sent to Cairo, there was to them no mystery regarding him. Several spoke of his going away as being a good riddance, and declared him to be unfit for respectable society. But I did not answer them, and after a while the subject dropped. Voltaire, however, was not in the room, and when, after having breakfasted, I was wondering where he was, I felt the old terrible sensation come over me. I tried to resist the influence that was drawing me out of the room, but I could not. I put on my overcoat and hat, and drawn on by an unseen power, I went away towards the fir plantation in which the summer house was built. As I knew I should, I found Voltaire there. He smiled on me and lifted his hat politely. "I thought I would allow you to have a good breakfast before summoning you," he said, "especially as this is the last conversation we shall have for some time." I thought I detected a look of triumph in his eyes, yet I was sure he regarded me with intense hatred. "Yes," I said, "I am come. What is your will now?" "This. I find that Mr. Temple has told you about an interview which was held in the library last night." "Yes, it is true." "Do you know of what you are in danger?" "No. What?" "Hanging." "What for?" "For murdering Kaffar." "Did I kill him?" "I remember nothing. What was done was not because of me, but because of the demon that caused me blindly to act." "Names are cheap, my man, and I don't mind. Claptrap morality is nothing to me. Yes, you killed Kaffar. Killed him with that knife you held in your hand. I meant that you should. Kaffar was getting troublesome to me, and I wanted to get him out of the way. To use you as I did was killing two birds with one stone. You know that Miss Forrest has promised to marry me if Kaffar be not forthcoming by next Christmas Eve. That, of course, can never be. So my beautiful bride is safe." And he looked at me with a savage leer. "Have you brought me here to tell me that?" "No, but to tell you a little good news. I have decided to hold you as the slave to my will until the day Miss Gertrude Forrest becomes Mrs. Herod Voltaire, and then to set you free. Meanwhile, I want to give you a few instructions." "What are they?" "You are not to take one step in trying to prove that Kaffar is alive." "Ah!" I cried, "you fear I might produce him. Then I have not killed him, even through you. Thank God! Thank God!" "Stop your pious exclamations," he said. "No, you are wrong. You did kill Kaffar, and he lies at the bottom of yonder ghostly pool. So that is not the reason. Why I do not wish you to search for him is that thereby you might find out things about me that I do not wish you to know. In such a life as mine, there are naturally things I do not wish known. In going to my old haunts, trying to unearth Kaffar, you would learn something about them. And so I command you," he continued, in a hoarse tone that made me shudder, "that you do not move one step in that direction. If you do, well, you know my power." From that moment I felt more enslaved than ever. I shuddered at the thought of disobeying him. I felt more than ever a lost man. As I felt at that moment, in spite of my desire to let everyone know this man's power over me, I would rather have pulled out my tongue than have done so. "Are those all your commands?" I said humbly. "Ah, you are cowed at last, are you?" he said mockingly. "You matched your strength with mine. Now you know what it means. You did not think I could crush you like a grasshopper, did you?" "Yes." "I have one other command for you. You must go to London to morrow and go on with your old work. You must not hold any communications with Miss Forrest, my affianced bride. I myself am going to London to-day, and most likely shall remain there for a while. Perhaps I shall want to see you occasionally. If I do, you will quickly know. I shall have no need to tell you my address." And he laughed a savage laugh. "Is that all?" I said. "That is all. You will come to the wedding, Mr. Blake. You shall see her arrayed for her husband, dressed all in white, as a bride should be. You shall see her lips touch mine. You shall see us go away together, the woman you love and the man who has crushed you as if you were a worm." This maddened me. By a tremendous effort of will I was free. "That shall never be. Somehow, some way, I will thwart you," I cried. "I will free myself from you. I will snap your cruel chain asunder." "I defy you," he said. "You can do nothing that I have commanded you not to do. For the rest, I care not a jot." He went away, leaving me alone, and then all the sensations of the previous nights came back to me. I remembered what the ghost was supposed to foretell, and the evil influence the dark pond was said to have. I saw again the large red hand in the water's surface, and I recalled dimly the struggle, the fighting, the strange feeling I had as my senses began to leave me. Could I have killed him? If I did, I was guiltless of crime. It was not my heart that conceived the thought. It was not I who really did the deed. I had no pangs of conscience, no feeling of remorse, and yet the thought that I had hurried a man into eternity was horrible. I wandered in the plantation for hours, brooding, thinking, despairing. No pen can describe what I felt. No words can convey to the mind the thoughts and pains of my mind and heart. Never did I love Miss Forrest so much. Never was Voltaire's villainy so real. And yet I was to lose her, and that man, a fiend in human form, was to wed her. I could do nothing. He had paralyzed my energies. He had set a command before me which was as ghastly as hell, and yet I dared not disobey. I, a young, strong man, was a slave of the worst kind. I was the plaything, the tool of a villain. I had to do as he told me. I had to refrain from doing what he told me I was not to do. I had done I knew not what. Perchance a hangman's rope was hanging near me even now. I could not tell. And yet I dared not rise from my chains and see whether the things I had been accused of doing were true. I went back to the house. Voltaire was gone. While the guests and family were having their lunch, I felt that I could not join them, so I went into the library. I had not been there 10 minutes when Miss Forrest entered. She looked pale and worried. I suppose that I too must have been haggard, for she started when she saw me. She hesitated a moment and then spoke. "The whole party are going for a ride this afternoon. They have just been making arrangements. They are going to ask you to join them. Shall you go?" she asked. "No, I shall not go," I replied. "Will you come here at 3 o'clock?" "Yes," I said, wondering what she meant. But I had not time to ask her, for 2 young men came into the room. I went to my room and tried to think, but I could not. My mind refused to work. I watched the party ride away. It was comparatively small now, for several had returned to their homes. And then I found my way to the library. I sat for a while in silence, scarcely conscious of my surroundings. And then I wondered how long Miss Forrest would be before she came, and what she would tell me. The clock on the mantelpiece began to strike 3. It had not finished when she entered the room. I placed a chair for her besides my own, which she accepted without a word. For a minute neither of us spoke, and then she said abruptly, "You told me you loved me when we rode out together the other day." "I did," I said. "And I do love you with all the intensity that a human heart is capable of loving. But it is hopeless now." "Why?" "You have promised to marry another man." "What do you know of this?" Both of us were very excited. We were moved to talk in an unconventional strain. "Mr. Temple told me of your interview together last night." A slight flush came to her face. "But Mr. Temple has told you the condition of the promise as well?" she said. "Yes, but that condition makes me hopeless." "What?" she cried. "But no, I will not entertain such a thought. You are as innocent as I am." "Yes, I am innocent in thought, in intent, and in heart. But as for deed itself, I know not." "I do not understand you," she said. "You speak in words that convey no meaning to my mind. Will you explain?" "I cannot, Miss Forrest. I would give you all I possess if I could. I have nothing that I would keep secret from you, and yet I cannot tell you that which you would know." Did she understand me? Did her quick mind guess my condition? I could not tell, and yet a strange look of intelligence flashed from her eyes. "Mr. Blake," she said, "my soul loathes the thought of marrying that man. If ever my promise has to be fulfilled, I shall die the very day on which he calls me wife." My heart gave a great throb of joy. Her every word gave me hope in spite of myself. "Mr. Blake," she continued, "I never must marry him." "God grant you may not," I said. "I must not," she said, "and you must keep me from danger." "I, Miss Forrest, I would give you the world if I could, but how can I? You do not know the terrible slavery that binds me, neither can I tell you." "I shall trust in you to deliver me from this man," she went on without heeding me. "You must prove yourself to be innocent. To do that I must bring this man Kaffar. I know nothing of him. I could never find him. Oh, I tell you, Miss Forrest, 1,000 evil powers seem to rend me when I attempt to do what I long for." "I shall trust in you," she cried. "Surely you are sufficiently interested in me to save me from a man like Voltaire." "Interested?" I cried. "I would die for you. I love you so, and yet I can do nothing." "You can do something. You can do everything. You can save me from him." "Oh," I cried, "I know I must appear a pitiful coward to you. It is for me you have placed yourself in this position, while I refuse to try to liberate you from it. If only I could, if I dared! But I am chained on every hand." "But you're going to break those chains. You're going to be free. You're going to be happy." Her words nerved me. The impossible seemed possible, and yet everything was misty. "Only one thing can make me happy," I said, "and that can never be now. I have lost my strength. I am become a pitiful coward." "You are going to be happy," she repeated. "Miss Forrest," I said, "do not mock me. My life for days has been a hell. I have had a terrible existence. No light shines in the sky. You cannot think what your words mean to me, or you would not speak them. Will you not, for my sake, if not for your own, exert yourself? Will you not think of my happiness a little? The thought of marrying that man is madness." "Miss Forrest," I cried, "you must think I have lost all manhood, all self-respect, when you hear what I say. But the only thing that could make me think of trying to do what is 10,000 times my duty to do, is that you will give me some hope that, if I should succeed, you will be the wife of such a poor thing as I am." She looked at me intently. She was very pale, and her eyes shone like stars. Beautiful she looked beyond compare, and so grand, so noble. She was tied down to no conventionalities. Whither her pure, true heart led her, she followed. "If you succeed," she said, "I will be your wife." "But not simply from a feeling of pity?" I cried. "I could not let you do that. I have manliness enough for that even yet." "No," she said proudly, "but because you are the only man I ever did or can love." For a minute I forgot my woes, my pains. No ghastly deed taunted me with its memory, no dark cloud hung in the skies. I felt my Gertrude's lips against mine. I felt that her life was given to me. I was no longer alone and desolate. A pure, beautiful woman had trusted me so fully, so truly, that hope dawned in my sky, and earth was heaven. "Now, Justin," she said, after a few minutes of happy silence, "you must away." Every hour may be precious. God knows how gladly I would be with you, but it must not be. But remember, my hope lies in you, and my love is given to you. God bless you." She went away then, and left me, while I, without knowing why, prepared to start for London. I had a great work to do. I had, if I was to win Gertrude for my wife, to break and crush Voltaire's power over me. I had to find Kaffar, if he was to be found, and that to me was an awful uncertainty, and I had to bring him to Gertrude before the next Christmas Eve. Away from her, the skies were dark again. Great heavy weights rested on my heart, and my life seemed clogged. Still, her love had nerved me to do what I otherwise could never have done. It had nerved me to try, and so, with her warm kiss burning on my lips, I hurried off to the great metropolis without any definite idea why I was going. End of chapter 13.
Chapter 14 of Weapons of Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Camille Hill. Weapons of Mystery by Joseph Hocking. Chapter 14. God. For the next 3 months, I was an atheist. These are easy words to write, but terrible to realize. No one but those who know can tell the terror of a man who has given up belief in an eternal goodness, in a living God that cares for man. I left Yorkshire with some little hope in my heart. The memory of Gertrude's word was with me, cheering me during the long ride. But when once alone in my rooms, nothing but a feeling of utter desolation possessed my heart. The terrible night on the Yorkshire moors came back again. The dark, forbidding waters, the ghastly red hand, the gleaming knife, the struggle, all were real. Did I kill him? I did not know. Possibly I was a murderer in act, if not in thought. I could not bear to think of it. Who can bear to think of having taken away a fellow creature's life, and he might be lying in Drearwater Pond even then? Then there was the terrible spell that this man had cast upon me. I felt it clinging to every fibre of my being. I was not living a true life. I was living a dual life. A power extraneous to myself, and yet possessing me, made me a mere machine. As the days and weeks passed away, things became worse. I promised Gertrude to exert myself to find Kaffar, and to set her free from her promise to Voltaire. But I could not do it. His command was upon me. I felt that it was ever in his mind that I should not make any efforts, and I had to obey. And his power was evil. His motives were fiendish. His nature was depraved. Still, preachers talked of a loving God, of the good being stronger than the evil. It could not be. Try, resist, struggle, said hope and duty and love. And I tried, I resisted, I struggled. And still I was bound in chains. Still I was held by a mysterious occult power. Then it ceased to feel to be a duty to rid Gertrude of Voltaire. Why should I struggle and resist? Supposing I succeeded, was I any more fit to be her husband than he? What was I? At best, a poor weak creature, the plaything of a villain. At any time he could exert his power and make me his slave. But I might be worse than that. I might, with my own hand, have sent a man into eternity. How did I know that it was Voltaire's power that made me do the deed? Might not my blind passion have swept me unto this dark deed? But that could not be. No, no, I could not believe that. Besides, Voltaire had told me it was because of him. Still, I was not fit to be her husband. Then her words came back to me, and her pure influence gave me strength. She, so pure, so true, had seemed to understand my position, had bid me hope and be brave. She had told me she loved me. She, whom hundreds of brave men would love to call their own. I would try again. I would break the chains Voltaire had forged. I would hurl from me the incubus that would otherwise crush me. I tried again and again and again and again. I failed. I did not pray. I could not. If God cared, I thought, he would help the innocent. I was innocent in thought, and still I was not helped. God did not care, for he helped me not. Months had passed away, and I had taken no forward step. I was still enslaved. The preachers were wrong. God did not care for the beings he had made. There was no God. God meant the good one. God is eternally good, all-powerful, if there is a God. But there is not, I said. Evil was rampant. Every day vice triumphed. Every day virtue suffered. Goodness was not the strongest force. Vice was conquering. Evil powers were triumphant. Why should any exception be made for me? If there is a God, evil would be checked, destroyed. Instead of which, it was conquering every day. There could be no God. And if no God, good and evil were little more than names. We were the sport of chance, and chance meant the destruction of anything like moral responsibility. I could not help being constituted as I was. Neither could Voltaire help his nature. One set of circumstances had surrounded his life, another mine, and our image and shape were according to the force of these circumstances. As for a God who loved us, it was absurd. And yet, who gave us love, made us capable of loving? Was love the result of chance, which was in reality nothing? And again, whence the idea of God? Whence the longing for him? Besides, did not the longing for him give evidence of his being? But I will not weary the reader with my mental wanderings. They are doubtless wearisome enough, and yet they were terribly real to me. Although I have used but a few pages of paper in hinting at them, they caused me to lie awake through many a weary night. Still no help came. I went to church one Sunday night. There was nothing of importance that struck me during the service, save the reading of one of the lessons. It was the story of the youth who was possessed with a devil, which the disciples could not cast out. The minister was, I should think, a good man, for he read it naturally, and with a great deal of power. And when he came to the part where Jesus came and caused the evil spirit to come out of him, my heart throbbed with joy. Was there hope for me? Was Jesus Christ still the same wonderful power? Was he here now to help, to save? That was at the end of 3 months. I went home and prayed to be delivered from the evil power which chained me. I might have turned my thoughts in another direction, for all the good I could see it did me. The old numbing feeling still possessed me. My little spark of faith began to die. It was foolishness to think of God, I said. A week later, I walked in Hyde Park. An evil influence seemed to draw me in the direction of the Marble Arch. I had not gone far when I met Voltaire. I knew then that I was more in his power than ever. He did not speak, he only looked, but it was a look of victory, of power. I got into Oxford Street and on a bus. Mechanically I bought a paper, one of the leading dailies. Listlessly I opened it, and the first words that caught my eye were reviews of books. I glanced down at the column and saw the words David Elginbrod by George MacDonald. This book is one of remarkable power, the paper went on to say, and will appeal to the highest class of minds. Its interest is more than ordinary, because it deals with the fascinating subjects of animal magnetism, mesmerism, and spiritualism. Moreover, Dr. MacDonald shows what enormous power, for evil or for good, may be exerted by it. Indeed, the principal characters in the stories are so influenced by it that the author is led to make a quiet study of these occult sciences. I did not read the review further. What I had read was sufficient to determine me to buy the book. Accordingly, on my arrival in the city I obtained a copy, and then, with all possible haste, I made my way home, and throwing myself in a chair, sat down to read. I did not cease reading until I had finished what I regarded then, and still regard, as one of the finest religious novels of the age. This may seem to many extravagant praise, but when I remember the influence it had on my life, I feel inclined to hold to my opinion. Putting aside the other parts of the book, that in which I was so fearfully interested might be briefly stated thus. Mesmerism and animal magnetism may be regarded as human forces. Those possessing them, and thereby having the power to mesmerize, may subjugate the will of those who are susceptible to mesmeric influences and hold them in a complete and terrible slavery. The oftener the victim yields to the will of the mesmerist, the stronger will his power become. There is only one means by which the person under this influence can be free. This is by obtaining a strength superior to that of the mesmerist, which is only to be realized by being in communion with a higher life and participating in that life. Only the divine power in the life of the victim can make him possess a power superior to the mesmerist. Possessing that, he becomes free, because he possesses a life superior to mere physical or human power. The victim in the book is led to seek that divine life in her, and although she loses her physical life, she dies freed from the terrible thraldom which had been cursing her existence. That is all I need to write concerning the book I have mentioned, that is, descriptive of its teaching. It turned my mind into a new channel. The teaching seemed scientific and reasonable. If there were a God who was the source of all life, he could, by entering into the life of an individual, give him such forces as would be superior to any other force. This was true. Further, because all evil was in opposition to the laws of the universe, and thus the good must overcome the evil. This, however, I clearly saw. If I could possess the power of God in me, I must submit myself wholly and unreservedly to him. He had made me a free agent, and I must allow him to possess me wholly. I will not describe what followed. It is too sacred a subject to parade. We cannot write on paper our deepest feelings. We cannot describe in words the yearnings and experiences of the soul. Were I to try, I could give no adequate idea of my hopes and fears, my prayers and struggles. To realize my life, a similar condition must be experienced. I ask, however, that I may be believed when I say this. A month later, I really believed in God, and soon I began to realize his power. I felt a new life growing in me, a higher life. I began to be possessed of a power whereby I could conquer myself, subjugate my own will, and be master over my passions. The reader may smile as he or she reads this, but this is true. When I became possessed of a life whereby I became master of my lower self, I felt free from Voltaire's power. I realized that to be master over myself meant being a slave to none. I was free, and I knew it. A fuller, richer life surged within me, enabling me to rise above the occult forces of our physical and mental natures. Hope lived within me, and confidence as to the future began to inspire me. End of chapter 14. Recording by Camille Hill, Basingstoke, United Kingdom.
of Weapons of Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carl Henning. Weapons of Mystery by Joseph Hocking. Chapter 15. Beginning to Search. No sooner did I begin to feel freed from Voltaire's power than I began to exert myself to find Kaffar, if indeed he were to be found. There was much in my favour. I possessed freedom. I had plenty of money. I had plenty of time. On the other hand, there was much against me. Was he alive? Were Voltaire's words true? Had I in my mesmeric condition yielded to his will in such a degree as to kill the wily Egyptian and hurl him in the pond? Again, if he were alive, where was he? Who could tell? Supposing he had gone to Egypt, how could I find him? Possibly he had 1,000 haunts unknown to me. I determined to go to Yorkshire, and soon found myself within the hospitable walls of Temple Hall. The house was very quiet, however, for which I was very glad. I wanted to talk quietly with Tom. I wanted to investigate the whole matter. When I had finished telling Tom my story, he seemed perfectly astounded. "What, Justin!" he exclaimed. "Do you mean to say that the villain used such means to get you out of his road and win Miss Forrest for himself?" "I felt he was unscrupulous when I first met him," I replied. "I am sure he guessed my secret, and determined to get me out of the way by fair means or by foul." We talked long concerning the matter. We tried to recall all that had been said and done, but, in spite of all, we could not hit upon any plan of action. "Do you think she will marry Voltaire?" I said, after a short silence, "if I cannot find Kaffar, or prove that he is alive?" "I'm sure she will, Justin. Never did I meet with anyone who has a higher sense of honour than she. I believe she would rather die than do a mean thing." "And yet," I said wearily, "I am almost certain I did not kill Kaffar. I can remember nothing distinctly, and yet I have the consciousness that I never struck him a blow." "And I, too, am sure you did not do this, Justin," replied Tom. "I felt that he was acting in spite of the terrible evidence against you. But what is the use? If you cannot find the Egyptian, he will marry Miss Forrest, and after that, well, all seems hopeless." "It shall not be hopeless," I said. "If he is alive, he shall be found, and I will bring him back, and she shall see him." "Ah, yes, and that reminds me, Justin. She bade me tell you that she would be in her own home at Kensington until after the next year." This made me joyful in spite of everything. She still had an interest in me. She still believed me innocent. "By the way, Tom," I said, after another short silence, "have you found out anything in relation to the ghost which appeared here during my visit?" "Nothing definite. Stay, I forgot. Simon Slowden said he had something particular to tell you when you came to Yorkshire again. I asked him the subject of this something particular, and he said it was about the ghost. I tried to make him explain further, but could not." "I'll see Simon at once," I said. "I cannot afford to let anything pass without examining it. Any little thing might give a clue to the mystery." I sought Simon in the stable yard, and found him as grim and platonic as ever. "Glad to see your honour," said Simon hastily. "I've made up my mind scores of times to write a letter, but I've had such bad luck with letters that I hadn't the necessary quantity of pluck, you know." "Bad luck with your letters, Simon? How?" "Why, you see, your honour, after the doctor experimented on me by vaccinating me against smallpox, cholera, and the measles, together with whooping cough and several other baby complaints as if a injurious effect upon people as have cut their wisdom teeth, you know, as I told your honour, that I caught that there weary disease of smallpox which spoilt my beauty for ever. Well, as I told you months ago, I went to the housemaid for a mite of comfort, and catches her a courting with the coachman. So I goes home, and I says I'll write her a letter as would charm a dead duck in a saucepan. So I begins my letter this here way. 'My dearest dear,' I says, 'times is bad, and people be glad to catch anything. So I thinking, smallpox better than nothing. Catch that. Forgive me, and I'll never do so no more. I'm crying all the day, as though I got my living with skin and onions. Relieve me, my dear, or my feelings will be too much for me. They be filling me faster than I can dispose of 'em, and if you don't leave that 'ere coachman and smile on me, I shall either go up like a balloon, or else there'll be a case of combustion. I went on in that 'ere style, you know, thinking she'd melt like a oyster in a frying pan, but she didn't, and the next thing I hears was that coachman were at the village alehouse reading my letter. Since then I've given up the tender passion, and given up writing letters." "Well, you have had bad luck, Simon, but perhaps you'll be more fortunate next time. Mr. Temple tells me you have something to tell me about the ghost. What is it?" You ain't a-seen that 'ere hinfidel Willin since he went away from here, Mr. Blake, have ye?" "I saw him in Hyde Park one day, but have never spoken to him." "Well, I'm in a fog." "In a fog? How?" "Why, I can't understand a bit why that 'ere ghost were got up." "You think it was got up, then?" "Certain of it, your honour." "Well, tell us about it." "Well, sir, after you left all of a hurry like, we had a big party in the house, and all the servants had help, and no sooner did I get in that there house than I begin to put two and two together, and then I see a individual that I begin to think were mighty like that 'ere ghost." "And who was that?" "Why, that 'ere ancient virgin, Miss Staggles." "Ah, what then?" "Well, I heard somebody telling her as how you were gone to London, and I thought she looked mighty pleased. After dinner I see her coming out of the drawing room and go away by herself, and I thought I'd watch. She went up to her room, your honour, and I got in a convenient place for watching her when she comes out. She weren't a minute afore she were out, Mr. Blake, a carrying something in her hands. She looks curiously around, and then I see her make straight for your bedroom door, and goes into your room. In a minute more she comes out with nothing in her hands. So then I says to myself, she's deposited some of her combustible matter in Mr. Blake's room. It was a bold and dangerous thing to do, your honour, but I goes into your room and looks around. Everything seems right. Then I looks and sees that the drawer of the wardrobe ain't quite shut, so I takes a step forward and peeps in." "And what did you see?" "Why, I see the trappings of that 'ere ghost, the shroud, knife, and all the rest on it." "Well, Simon?" "Well, sir, I takes it to my shanty and puts it in my own box, to show you at a convenient season, as Moses said." "Is that all?" "Not quite. The next morning I see her a-airing her sweet self on the lawn, so I goes up to her all familiar like, and I says, 'Top of the morning, Miss Staggles.' 'Who are you, man?' she says. 'As nice a chap as you ever see,' I said, 'though I am marked with smallpox, but that ain't my fault, ma'am. It's his own in the experimenting o' waccinating doctor.' 'What do you want with me, man?' she said. 'Why, ma'am,' I said, 'I'm young and simple, and I were frightened with a ghost t'other night, and I thought as how you, being purty ancient, might assist me in finding things out about it.' With that, sir, she looked all strange, and I thinks I'm on the right track, and I says again, 'That 'ere ghost were all got up, mum. I've played a ghost myself in a theatre, and I could never get up like you did the other night.' 'Me get up as a ghost?' she screamed. 'Man, you are mad.' 'Not so mad,' I says, 'seeing as how I see you carrying that 'ere ghost's wardrobe and put it in Mr. Blake's room last night.' She went off without another word, your honour, and the next thing I heard about her was that she'd gone to London." "And why did you not tell Mr. Temple?" "Well, Mr. Blake, he didn't know anything about her evening rambles with that 'ere hinfidel Willin, and wasn't acquainted with the things that you and me've talked about. Besides, I thought as how you were the one that ought to know first of all." I thought long over Simon's words, but could not understand them. Why should Miss Staggles pose as a ghost, even at the instigation of Voltaire? There could be nothing gained by it, and yet I was sure that it was not without meaning. Somehow it was connected with Voltaire's scheme, of that I was sure, but at the time my mind was too confused to see how. So far not one step had been taken to prove whether Kaffar was dead or alive, and although I knew nothing of a detective's business, I did not like taking any one into my confidence. I resolved to do all that was to be done myself. In spite of everything, I spent a pleasant evening at Temple Hall. We talked and laughed gaily, especially as Tom was preparing for his wedding with Miss Edith Gray, and when I told Miss Temple how Tom had popped the question in the landing at midnight after the appearance of the famous hall ghost, the merriment knew no bounds. It was after midnight when I retired to rest, but I could not sleep. I could not help thinking about this great problem of my life. How could I find Kaffar? How could I tell whether he was alive or dead? After tossing about a long time, I hit upon a plan of action, and then my mind had some little rest. The next morning I bade good-bye to my friends and started for the station. When I arrived all was quiet. Not a single passenger was there. While the two porters were lolling lazily around, enjoying the warmth of the bright May sun. I asked to see the station master. He was not at the station. Then I made inquiries for the booking clerk, who presently made his appearance. I found that there was a train leaving about midnight, which travelled northward, one that had been running some years. "Were you at the booking office on the day after New Year's Day?" I asked. "Yes, sir," replied the clerk. "Do you remember a man coming for a ticket that night who struck you as peculiar?" "What kind of a man, sir?" "A foreigner, small, dark, and wiry, speaking with an accent something like this," I said, trying to imitate Kaffar. "No, sir, I don't remember such a person. There were only 3 passengers that night. I remember it very well, because my brother was here with me, and they were all Yorkshire." "This midnight train is a stopping train?" "Yes, sir. It stops at every station from Leeds." "How far is the nearest station in the Leeds direction?" 7 miles, sir. The population is rather thin here, sir. It gets thicker the closer you get to Leeds." "And how far the other way?" "Only a matter of 3 miles northward, sir. There's a little village there, sir, has sprung up because of Lord Mansion, sir, and the company has put up a station." "And how far is the next station beyond that?" "A long way, sir. It's a junction where some go to catch the night express to Leeds. It must be 8 miles further on. The train is now due, sir, that goes there." "And it stops at the next station?" "Oh, yes, sir." I booked immediately for it, and in a few minutes arrived there. It was, if possible, more quiet than the one from which I had just come, a more dreary place one could not well see. I soon found the man who had issued tickets on the night I have mentioned. Did he remember such a passenger as I described? "Yes, sir," he said, "I do remember such a chap, partly because he was the only passenger, and partly because he looked so strange. He looked as if he'd been fighting, and yet he was quite sober. He was a funny chap, sir, and one as I shouldn't have liked much to do with." "And where did he book for?" "Dingledale Junction, sir." "And he would be able to catch a train from there?" "He would have to wait a quarter of an hour for the express to Leeds," replied the man. "And how long will it be before there's another train to Dingledale Junction?" I asked anxiously. 3 hours and a half, sir." This was an awful blow to me. To wait all this time at that roadside station was weary work, especially as I could do nothing. I found, however, that I could hire a horse and trap that would take me there in about 2 hours. I therefore closed with this offer, and shortly after drove away. I felt sure I had made one step forward. Kaffar was alive. The blunt Yorkshireman's description of him tallied exactly with the real appearance of the Egyptian. Of course I was not sure, but this was strongly in favour of his being alive. There was something tangible for which to work now, and my heart grew lighter. Dingledale Junction proved to be rather a busy place. There were 2 platforms in the station and a refreshment room. I found also that Mr. Smith was actually represented there in the shape of a small boy, a dozen novels, and a few newspapers. This, however, did not augur so well for my inquiries. The officials here would not be so likely to notice any particular passenger. Still, there was something in my favour. Kaffar would in any circumstances attract attention in a country place. His appearance was so remarkable that any countryman would stop for a second look at him. After a great many inquiries, I found that Kaffar, or a man strongly resembling him, had been there on the night in question, and had taken a ticket for Leeds. He had no luggage, and what made the porter in attendance remember him so vividly was the fact of his being angry when asked if he had any luggage to be labelled. So far, then, my inquiries were successful. So far I might congratulate myself on making forward steps, and yet I was scarcely satisfied. It seemed too plain. Would Kaffar have allowed himself to be followed in such a way? I was not sure. On the one hand, he was very cunning, and on the other he knew but little of the means of detecting people in England. I took the next train for Leeds, and there my success ended. I could find traces of him nowhere. This was scarcely to be wondered at. Leeds is a great commercial centre where men of every nationality meet, and of course Kaffar would be allowed to pass unnoticed. Then I began to think what the Egyptian would be likely to do, and after weighing the whole matter in my mind, I came to this conclusion. Either he was in London with Voltaire, or he had gone back to Egypt. The first was not likely. If Kaffar were seen in London, Voltaire's plans would be upset, and I did not think my enemy would allow that. Of course, he might have means of keeping him there in strict secrecy, or he might have a score of disguises to keep him from detection. Still, I thought the balance would be heaviest on the side of his returning to Egypt. I naturally thought he would return to his native land, because I had heard him say he talked none of the European languages besides English and a smattering of Turkish. My next step, therefore, was to return to London and then go to Dover, Calais, Newhaven, and Dieppe, to try to see whether Kaffar could be traced. At the same time, I determined to have a watch set upon Voltaire and his every step dogged, so that if he held any communication with Kaffar, necessary steps might be taken to prove to Miss Forrest my innocence, and thus she might at once be freed from the designs of the man she hated. No sooner did I arrive in London, however, and took possession of my easy-chair when I knew Voltaire wanted me to go to him, and I knew too that a month before I should have had to yield to the power he possessed. I need not say that I did not go. My will was now stronger than his, and by exercising that will I was able to resist him. Still, none but those who have been under such a spell can imagine what a struggle I had even then. God only gives us power to use, and he will not do for us what we can do for ourselves. For long hours I felt this strange influence, and then it ceased. Evidently he had failed in his design, and for the time, at all events, had abandoned it. Next morning, when I was preparing to visit Scotland Yard, a servant came into my room bearing a card on a tray. I took it and read, "Herod Voltaire." "Show him up," I said to the servant. End of chapter 15. Recording by Carl Henning. Chapter 16 of Weapons of Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carl Henning. Weapons of Mystery by Joseph Hocking. Chapter 16. Struggling for Victory. I confess that I was somewhat excited as I heard him coming up the stairs. I was sure that every means he could devise to defeat me would be eagerly used. The man was a villain, possessed of a strange and dangerous power, and that power he would not hesitate to exert in every possible way. But I was not afraid. My faith in God had given me life, and so I would dare to defy the wretch. I did not look at him until the girl had shown him in and left the room. Then our eyes met. I recognized the steely glitter of those whitey grey orbs, which at times seemed tinted with green. I knew he was seeking to exert his old influence, and once I thought I should have to yield. The power he possessed was something terrible, and I had to struggle to the utmost to remain unconquered. His efforts were in vain, however, and for the time, at all events, the battle was not with him. "Will you sit down, Mr. Voltaire?" I said, after a minute's perfect silence. He sat down as if in astonishment. "Might I ask your business?" I asked, as coolly as I could. This question either aroused his anger or he began to play a part. "Yes," he said, "you will know my business at your cost. I thought you had found out before this that I was not the man either to be disobeyed or trifled with." I did not think it wise to speak. "I have come to tell you," he went on, that you cannot escape my power, that you cannot disobey me and not suffer. Remember this: I conquered you, and you are my slave." Still, I did not think it wise to reply. "You think," he continued, "because you have realized some immunity from the power I wield, that I have left you. I have not, and it is greater than ever. You have dared to leave London. You have dared to do that which I told you not, and now I have come to tell you that you have aroused the anger of a man who laughs at conventional laws and snaps his fingers at the ordinary usages of society. One who knows nothing and cares nothing for your claptrap morality, and will not be influenced by it." "I'm sorry if I've angered you," I replied humbly. "Just so, and you will be more than sorry. Man, I hold your life in the hollow of my hand. One word from me and your liberty is gone. You will be dragged through the streets like a common felon." "Am I guilty of so much, then?" I said. "Did I really kill that man?" He looked at me curiously, as if he suspected something. "Kill him?" he replied. "Of course you did. But even if you did not, it is all the same. Kaffar cannot be found or proved alive, and thus my power over you is absolute." "I wonder you do not use it," I said quietly. "I do not use it because it does not pay me to do so. My policy is to be quiet. Miss Forrest is mine because she knows I am master of your life. The months are swiftly passing away, Mr. Justin Blake. It is May now. In December I shall take her to my breast." "But supposing," I said, "that I find Kaffar, supposing before Christmas Eve comes I prove I am innocent of his death, what then?" "It is not to be supposed. You killed my friend, and even if you did not, you could never find him. You dare not, could not, take any necessary steps. You have not the power to ask other people to do it. Even now you cannot rise from your seat and walk across the room." Without a word I rose from my seat and walked across the room. Then I came back and coolly sat down again. "What does this mean?" he asked angrily. "It means," I said, "that you are deceived, mistaken. It means that your villainous schemes are of no effect, that the man whom you thought you had entrapped by a juggler's trick to be your tool and dupe is as free as you are, that he defies your power, that he tells you to do your worst." I felt that again he was trying to throw me into a kind of trance, that he was exerting all his power and knowledge. But I resisted, and I was free. I stood up again and smiled. Then a strange light lit up in his eyes. "Curse you!" he cried. "You defy me, eh? Well, you'll see what you get by defying me. In 5 minutes you'll be safe in a policeman's charge." "If I were you, I would try and learn the Englishman's laws before you appeal to them. The first question that will be asked will be why you have refrained from telling so long, for he who shelters a criminal by silence is regarded as an aider and an abettor of that criminal. Then, man, this case will be sifted to the bottom. That pond will be pumped dry, and every outlet examined. Besides, what about the booking clerk that issued a ticket to Kaffar 2 hours after you and Mr. Temple found me?" "It's a lie," he cried. "Kaffar was never seen." "Well, then, if you are so sure, give me in charge. It will not be very much opposed to my wishes, for by so doing you will set the whole machinery of the law of England on Kaffar's trail, and I promise you it will find him. English law is hard on murderers, but all evidence is put through a very fine sieve in an English court of justice. Kaffar is not an ordinary-looking man, and from Scotland Yard our police authorities hold communication with all other police authorities in the civilized world. I tell you, man, your trumped-up story would be torn to pieces in 5 minutes, and in the end you would be safely lodged down at Dartmoor for 14 years." He sat silent a minute, as if in deep thought. Then he said slowly, "Mr. Justin Blake, you think you have outwitted Herod Voltaire. Continue to think so. I shall not give you in charge, not because I believe in your paltry story, but because I should lose Miss Forrest by so doing, and I cannot afford to do that, if for nothing else than to spite you. You think you are free from me. Wait, You think Kaffar is to be found. Well, wait. But I tell you, you shall repent all this. I will marry the woman you love, and then I will lead you such a life as you never conceived. You shall pray to die, and death shall not come. You shall suffer as never man suffered. The condition of the Christians whom Nero used as torches shall be heaven to what yours shall be. Meanwhile... All this time he kept looking at me, and his words were uttered with a nervous force and an intensity that was terrible. I felt a strange chilling sensation creep over me, and involuntarily I sat down. No sooner had I done so than he gave a savage, exultant yell. "You are mine again!" he cried. It was a terrible struggle. His will and mine fought for the mastery. His strengthened by a knowledge of laws of which I was ignorant, and constant exertion of it. Mine by a new life which I had but lately begun to live, by a strength given me through communion with my Maker. For a minute I was chained to the seat. My senses were numbed, and all the while his terrible glittering eyes rested on mine. Then my strength began to return, and I again stood up, and in a few seconds I was master of myself. "Coward," I said, "you sought to take me unawares. You have done your utmost, and I am your master even now. Now go and bear this in mind, that the right and the truth shall be triumphant." I rung the bell as I spoke, and the servant appeared. "Show this gentleman out, Mary," I said. Never shall I forget the look of hatred that gleamed from his eyes as he left the room. If ever a man looked possessed of an evil spirit, it was he, but he did not speak. He walked down the stairs without a word, and then out into the street. I stood and watched him until he was out of sight, and then tried to collect my scattered thoughts. On the whole, I was not pleased with the interview. I had shown my hand. It would have been far better if I could have allowed him to still think I was in his power, but the temptation to show him my freedom was too strong. It would now be a trial of skill between us. If he could have believed that I was unable to do anything to free myself, I should have, perhaps, caught him unawares. Now he would be prepared for everything I could do. He would check my every move. If Kaffar were alive, he would have 1,000 means of keeping him out of my way. If dead, well then, I did not care much what happened. If the latter, however, I determined to give up my life for Miss Forrest, to put myself in the hands of the police authorities, and tell of the influence Voltaire had exerted over me. Meanwhile I must act, and that quickly. So I went straight to a private detective, a man I slightly knew. I refrained from going to Scotland Yard, as I thought Voltaire would be watching me. I gave this detective a description of Voltaire, told him his address, which I had ascertained through his letters to Temple Hall, and explained my wishes to him. He took up my points very quickly, saw what I wanted without any lengthened explanations, and expressed a willingness to serve me. So much pleased was I with this interview that I had no fear that my enemy would not be well looked after. After that I took train for Dover, and prepared to track Kaffar, if possible, wherever he had gone, not realizing at the time the task I had proposed for myself. I thought I made a forward step at Dover, for, on inquiring at an hotel there, I found that a man answering to Kaffar's description had engaged a bedroom for one night, and had gone on to Calais by the midday boat in time to catch the express for Paris. "Did this gentleman have any luggage?" I asked. The hotel proprietor did not think the gentleman carried any luggage, but he would inquire. On inquiry of the hotel porter, I found that he carried a Gladstone bag, rather small and new. This was particularly remembered, first, because the foreign gentleman seemed very particular about it, and second, because there seemed to be nothing in it. So far so good. I determined to go on to Paris. It could do no harm. It might do good. I could speak the French language fairly, and might by some means find out the steps he had taken. Arrived at Paris, I was completely blocked. He was not remembered in the custom house. He was not remembered at some 20 hotels at which I called. Again I began to think what he was likely to do. I did not think he would possess very much money, and a man of his temperament would devise some means of getting some. How? Work would be a slow process and not suited to his nature. Kaffar would get money by gambling, but that did not help me forward. To search out all the gambling houses in Paris would be a hopeless task. Besides, would he gamble in Paris, a city of which he knew nothing? I did not think so. Where then? Monte Carlo. No doubt the reader will smile at my attempts as a private detective, but, realizing the circumstances by which I was surrounded, there may be some excuse for my unbusinesslike way of going to work. Besides, I was not sure that Kaffar was alive. I only had some vague grounds of thinking he was. I went to Monte Carlo. I inquired at the hotels. I inquired at the casino. Without success. I learned one great lesson there, however, and that was the evil of gambling. In spite of tinsel and gilt, in spite of gay attire and loud laughter, in spite of high-sounding titles and ancient names, never did I see so much real misery as I saw in the far-renowned gaming place. For days I tried to think what to do, without avail. Kaffar had not been at the casino. He had not stayed at any of the hotels. Where was he, then? I began to entertain the idea that he had gone to Egypt as he had said. I would do my best to find out. Accordingly, I went to all the seaports along the coast of France and Italy from which he would be likely to set sail for Egypt. I was unsuccessful until I came to Brindisi. Here I found that inquiries could easily be made. There were only 2 hotels in the place, one of which was very small. At the smaller of the 2, I found on inquiry that a man answering to my description had stayed there a day and a night, waiting for the boat for Alexandria. The hotel proprietor said he should not have remembered him, but that he had talked Arabic with him. This traveller had also told him he had come from England, the land of luxury and gold, and was going to Cairo. He did not remember his name. Egyptians often come to Brindisi, and to him one name was pretty much like another. He called them all Hawaja, and remembered nothing more. He did not keep a hotel register. Little and poor as this evidence was, I determined to go to Egypt. It was now June, and terribly hot. Even at Brindisi, I knew the heat must be worse in Cairo, but that was nothing. If I could find this man, I should be rewarded 1,000-fold. Accordingly, the next night, when an Austrian Lloyd steamer stopped at this little old-fashioned seaport on its way to Alexandria, I secured a berth and went on board. The voyage was not long, neither was it very tedious. At night especially it was glorious. To sit on deck and gaze at the smooth sea, which reflected in its deep waters the bright starry heavens, while the splash of the waters made music on the vessel's side, was to experience something not easily forgotten. Arrived in Alexandria, I again set inquiries on foot, but with far less chance of success. Kaffar was not a marked man here. In this town, where almost every nationality was to be seen, no notice would be taken of him. 1,000 men answering to Kaffar's description might be seen every day. Still, I did all I could, and then hurried on to Cairo. I have not tried to give any detailed account of my journeys, nor of the alternate feelings of hope and despair that possessed me. This must be left to the imagination of my readers. Let them remember the circumstances of the story as I have related them. Let them think of how much depended on my discovery of Kaffar. Let them also try to fancy something of my feelings, and they will be able to guess at my weary nights and anxious days. They will know how feverishly I hurried from port to port and from town to town. Anyhow, I will not try to describe them, for I should miserably fail. Cairo was comparatively empty. The heat had driven the tourists away to colder climes. The waiters in the hotels lolled around with little or nothing to do. Only a few guests required their attendance. Everything was very quiet. The burning sun fairly scorched the leaves of the acacia trees, which grew everywhere. The Nile was exceedingly low, and water was comparatively scarce. The older part of Cairo was simply unbearable. The little Coptic community dwelling in the low huts, which reeked with dirt and vermin, would, one would have thought, have been glad to have died. I had no success in Cairo. 12 times I was buoyed up with hopes. 12 times my hopes were destroyed, leaving me more despairing than ever. In spite of the terrible heat, all that could be done I did. Recommended by a hotel proprietor, I engaged two of the shrewdest men in this wonderful city to try and find Kaffar, but they could discover no trace of him. I went to mosques, to temples, to bazaars. In vain. If he were in Cairo, he was hiding. Oh, the weary work, the dreadful uncertainty, hoping, despairing, ever toiling, ever searching, yet never achieving. The months were slipping by. It was now August, and I was no nearer finding him than when I started. Must I give up then? Should I renounce my life's love? Should I yield my darling to Voltaire? Never! I formed a new resolution. I would go back to England. Doubtless I had gone clumsily to work, and thus my failure would be explained. When once back in London, I would engage the cleverest detectives the city could boast of, and I would state the whole case to them. Perchance they could do what I had failed to accomplish. This determination I at once carried into practice, and in a little more than a week I again saw the white cliffs of Dover. I did not rest. Arriving at Victoria, I drove straight to Scotland Yard, and in an hour later two of the most highly recommended officers of the London Detective Police Force were in possession of all the facts that I could give them that would lead to the discovery of the Egyptian, providing he lived. Then I drove back to my rooms in Gower Street, weary and sad, yet not hopeless. There were 4 months in which to act. 2 clever men were at work, while, thank God, I was free to act and to think. Yet the future looked terribly doubtful. Would the inquiries be successful? Would Gertrude be freed from Voltaire? And should I be happy? End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Weapons of Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carl Henning. Weapons of Mystery by Joseph Hocking. Chapter 17. Using the Enemy's Weapons. 2 months passed, and no tidings of Kaffar, at least none that were worthy of consideration. The detectives had done all that men could do. They had made every inquiry possible. They had set on foot dozens of schemes, but all in vain. Voltaire, who had been closely watched, was apparently living a quiet, harmless life, and was not, so far as could be seen, in communication with him. I had done all that I could do myself. I had followed in England every possible clue, all of which had ended in failure. 3 months passed, still no reliable news. One detective fancied he had detected him in Constantinople. Another was equally certain he had, at the same time, seen him in Berlin. I became almost mad with despair. The 1st of December had come, and I was not a step nearer finding the man whose presence would free me from Voltaire's villainous charge. That which troubled me most was the fact that I did not know whether he were alive. Even if I did not kill him, perhaps Voltaire had got him out of the way so that he might fasten the guilt on me. What, after all, was the thought that maddened me? If he should be lying at the bottom of Drearwater Pond? There were only 24 days now, 3 weeks and 3 days, and I knew not what to do. If I failed, my love would marry the man who was worse than a fiend, while I, for whom she was to suffer this torture, was unable to help her. And yet I had tried, God alone knows how, but only to fail. Still, there were 24 days, but what were they? Kaffar, if he were alive, might be in Africa, Australia. No one knew where. I saw no hope. A week more slipped by. There were only 17 days left now. I was sitting in my room, anxiously waiting for the Continental mail and any telegrams which might arrive. I had heard the postman's knock, and in a minute more letters were brought in. Eagerly I opened those which came from the detectives and feverishly read them. Still in the dark, nothing discovered. That summed up the long reports they sent me. I read the other letters. There was nothing in them to help me. Still another week went by. Only 10 days were wanting to Christmas Eve, and I knew no more of Kaffar's whereabouts than I did on the day when I defied Voltaire and started on my search. Again reports from the detectives came, and still no news. No doubt by this Voltaire was gloating over his victory, while I was nearly mad with despair. Only 10 days! I must do something. It was my duty, at all hazards, to free Gertrude Forrest from Voltaire. That was plain. I could not find the Egyptian, and thus it was probable I had killed him, as had been said. What must I do? This and this only. I must go to Scotland Yard and relate to the authorities my whole story. I must tell them of Voltaire's influence over me, and that it was probable I had, while held under a mesmerist spell, killed the man I had been trying to find. This was all. It might bring this villain under suspicion, and, if so, it would hinder him from exacting the fulfilment of Gertrude Forrest's promise. It was at best but an uncertain venture, but it was all I could do. I owed it to the woman I loved. It was my duty to make this sacrifice. I would do it. I wasted no time. I put on my overcoat and walked to Scotland Yard. I put my hand upon the door of the room which I knew belonged to one of the officials, to whom I determined to report my case. I thought of the words I should say when— "Stop!" I'm sure I heard that word, clear and distinct. Where it came from I knew not, but it was plain to me. An idea flashed into my mind. Mad, mad, I must have been, never to have thought of it before. 10 days, only 10 days! But much might be done even yet. I rushed away and got into St. James's Park, and there, in comparative quietness, I began to think. The clouds began to dispel, the difficulties began to move away. Surely I had hit upon a plan at last, a plan of which I should have thought at the outset. I walked on towards Westminster Abbey, still working out my newly conceived idea, and when there jumped into a cab. Yes, I remembered the address, for I had seen it only the day before. So I told the cabman to drive to the street, Chelsea. I was right. There on the door was the name of the man I had hoped to find, Professor von Virchow. I paid the cabman and knocked at the door with a beating heart. A sallow-faced girl opened the door and asked my business. Was Professor Virchow at home? Yes, he was at home, but would be engaged for the next quarter of an hour. After that, he could see me on business connected with his profession. I was accordingly ushered into a musty room which sadly wanted light and air. The quarter of an hour dragged slowly away, when the sallow-faced girl again appeared, saying that Professor von Virchow would be pleased to see me. I followed her into an apartment that was fitted up like a doctor's consulting room. Here I found the man I had come to see. He was a little man, about 5 foot 4 inches high. He had, however, a big head, a prominent forehead, and keen grey eyes. He wore gold-rimmed spectacles and was evidently well-fed and on good terms with himself. "You are a professor of mesmerism and clairvoyance, I believe?" I began. "That is my profession," said the little man. "Then I am in hopes that you may be able to help me in my difficulty." "I shall be pleased to help you," he said, still stiffly. "Can you," I went on, "tell the whereabouts of a man whom I may describe to you?" "That is very vague," was the reply. "Your description may be incorrect, or 100 men might answer to it. I would promise nothing under such conditions." "Perhaps I had better tell my story," I said. "I think you had," said the little professor quietly. "On the 2nd of January of the present year," I said, "a man disappeared in the night from a place in Yorkshire. He is an Egyptian and easily distinguished. A great deal depends on finding him at once. Ever since May, endeavours have been made to track him, but without success." "Perhaps he is dead," said the professor. Perhaps so, but even then, it is important to know. Can you help me find out his whereabouts?
Undoubtedly I can, but I must have a good photograph of him. Have you one?
I have not.
Could you obtain one?
I think not.
But this man has been seen by many people. Could not someone you know, and who knows him, sketch a faithful likeness from memory?
I do not know of anyone.
Then I could not guarantee to find him. You see, I cannot work miracles. I can only work through certain laws which I have been fortunate enough to either to recognize or discover. But there must ever be some data upon which to go. And, you see, you give me none that is in the least satisfactory.
Perhaps you can, I said, if I relate to you all the circumstances connected with what is, I think, a somewhat remarkable story. I had determined to tell this little man every circumstance which might lead to Kaffar's discovery, especially those which happened in Yorkshire. It seemed my only resource, and I felt that somehow something would come of it. I therefore briefly related what I have written in this story.
"The man who has mesmerized you is very clever," said the professor quietly, when I had finished. "It was very unfortunate for you that you should have matched yourself with such a one. His plot was well worked out in every respect. He only made a mistake in one thing."
"And that?"
"He thought it impossible that you should ever be freed from his power without his consent. Still, it was a well-planned affair. The story, the ghost, the quarrel, it was all well done."
"I fail to see what part the ghost had in the matter," I said. The professor smiled.
"No?"
he said.
"Well, I should not think it was a vital part of his plan, but it was helpful. He calculated upon the young lady's superstitious fancies. He knew what the particular form in which the ghost appeared portended, and it fitted in with his scheme of murder. Evidently he wanted the young lady to believe in your guilt, and thus give him greater chance of success. Ah, he is a clever man."
"But," I asked anxiously, "can you tell me of Kaffar's whereabouts now?"
"No, I cannot. That is, not today."
"When, then?"
"I may not be able to do so at all. It all depends on one man."
"Who is he?"
"Simon Slowden, I think you called him."
"Simon Slowden? How can he help us?"
"Evidently he is susceptible to mesmeric influences, and he knows the man you wish to find. But the difficulty lies here. Is he sufficiently susceptible?"
"Is that the only hope?"
"All I can see at present. I was going to suggest that you be thrown into a mesmeric sleep, but you could not be depended on. The experiences which you have had would make you very uncertain."
"Then your advice is—"
"Send for this man at once. If he fails, well, I have another alternative."
"May I know what?"
"No, not now."
"Answer me this. Do you think I killed Kaffar, the Egyptian?"
"No, I do not. But your enemy intended you should."
"Why did I not, then?"
"Because the Egyptian also possessed a mesmerist's power, and hindered you. At any rate, such is my opinion. I am not sure."
And the little man looked very wise. "Expect us early tomorrow morning," I said, and then went away to the nearest telegraph office with a lighter heart than I had known for many long months. The little professor had given me some hope. The matter was still enshrouded in mystery, but still I thought I had found a possible solution. "Send Simon Slowden to me at once," I telegraphed. "Extremely important. Wire back immediately the time I may expect him." Anxiously I waited for an answer. Although the message was flashed with lightning speed, it seemed a long time in coming. At length it came, and I read as follows: "Slowden will come by train leaving Leeds, 11:38. Meet him at St. Pancras." I immediately caught a cab and drove to Gower Street, and on looking at my timetable, I found that the train mentioned in the telegram arrived in London at 5:15. This would do splendidly. I could get Simon to my room and give him some breakfast, and then, after a little rest, drive direct to the professor's. I need not say I was early at St. Pancras the following morning. I had scarcely slept through the night, and anxiously awaited the appearance of the train. It swept into the station, and in good time, and to my great relief and delight I saw Simon appear on the platform, looking as stolid and imperturbable as ever. We were not long in reaching Gower Street, where Simon enjoyed a good breakfast, after which we drew up our chairs before the cheerful fire and began to talk. "Did you have a good journey, Simon?" I asked.
"Slept like the 7 sleepers of the Patriarch, sir, all the way from Leeds."
"And you don't feel tired now?"
"Not a bit, your honour."
"Then," I said, "I want to explain to you a few things that must have appeared strange." Accordingly, I told him of Voltaire's influence over me, and what came out of it.
"Why, sir," said Simon, when I had finished, "that 'ere villain must be wuss nor a hinfidel. He must be the old Nick in the garret. And do you mean to say, sir, that there 'ere beautiful Miss Forrest, who I've put down for you, is going to get married to that 'ere somnamblifying, waccinating villain, if his dutiful mate ain't found before Christmas Eve?"
"Only 9 days, Simon."
"But it mustn't be, your honour."
"So I say, Simon, and that's why I've sent for you."
"But I can't do nothing much, sir. All my wits have been waccinated away, and my blood is puddled like, which have affected the working of my brains. And, you see, all your detective chaps have failed."
"But I shan't fail, if you help me."
"Help you, Mr. Blake? You know I will."
"Simon, you offered to be my friend, now nearly a year ago."
"Ay, and this 'ere is a lad as'll stick to his offer, sir, and mighty proud to do so."
"Well, then, I'm in hopes we shall succeed."
"How, your honour?"
"By fighting Voltaire with his own weapons."
"What waccinating?"
"By mesmerism and clairvoyance, Simon."
"And who's the chap as have got to be waccinated, or mesmerised, as you call it?"
"You, if you will, Simon."
"Me, sir?"
said Simon aghast. "If you will."
"Well, I said after that there villain experimented on me in Yorkshire, I never would again. But if it's for you, sure, why, here goes. I'm pretty tough. But how's it to be done?"
Then I told him of my interview with the professor, and how he had told me that only he, Simon, could give the necessary help.
"Let's off at once, your honour," cried Simon. "I'm willing for anything if you can get the hupper, and of that 'ere villain and his other self. 9 days, sir, only 9 days. Let's get to the waccinator. I'd rather have smallpox a dozen times than you should be knocked overboard by such as he."
I was nothing loath, and so, although it was still early, we were soon in a cab on our way to the professor's. On arriving, we were immediately shown in, and the little man soon made his appearance.
"Ah, you've brought him," said he. "I'm glad to see you so prompt. Would you mind taking this chair, my friend?"
To Simon.
"That's it. Thank you. You've been travelling all night, and are a little tired, I expect, no? Well, it's well to be strong and able to bear fatigue. There, look at me. Ah, that's it."
With that he put his fingers on Simon's forehead, and my humble friend was unconscious of what was going on around him.
"He's very susceptible, but I am afraid he has not been under this influence a sufficient number of times for his vision to be clear. Still, we will try. Simon!"
"That's me," said Simon sleepily.
"Do you see Kafar, the Egyptian?"
He looked around as if in doubt. His eyes had a vacant look about them, and yet there seemed a certain amount of intelligence displayed. At any rate, it seemed so to me. "I see lots of people, all dim-like," said Simon slowly, "but I can't tell no faces. They all seem to be covered with a kind of mist."
"Look again," said the professor. "You can see more clearly now."
Simon peered again and again, and then said, "Yes, I can see him, but he looks all strange. He's a shaved off his whiskers, and have got a sort of red cap like a basin on his head." My heart gave a great bound. Kafar was not dead. Thank God for that. Where is he?"
"I'm trying to see, but I can't. Everything is misty. There's a black fog a-coming up." "Wait a few minutes," said the professor, "and then we'll try him again."
Presently he spoke again.
"Now," he said, "what do you see?"
But Simon did not reply. He appeared in a deep sleep.
"I thought as much," said the little man. "His nature has not been sufficiently prepared for such work. I suppose you had breakfast before you came here?"
I assured him that Simon had breakfasted on kidneys and bacon, after which he had made a considerable inroads into a cold chicken, with perchance half a pound of cold ham to keep it company, besides which he had taken 3 large breakfast cups of chocolate.
"Ah, that explains somewhat. Still, I think we have done a fair morning's work. We've seen that our man is alive."
"But do you think there is any hope of finding him?"
"I'm sure there is. Only be patient."
"But what must I do?"
"Well, take this man to see some of the sights of London until 3 o'clock. Then come home to dinner. After dinner he'll be sleepy. Let him sleep, if he will, until 9 o'clock. Then bring him here again. But let him have no supper until after I have done with him."
9 o'clock tonight? Why, do you know, that takes away another day. There will only want 8 clear days till Christmas Eve.
"I can't help that, sir," said the little professor testily. "You should have come before. But that is the way. Our science, which is really the queen of sciences, is disregarded. Only one here and there come to us, and then we are treated as no other scientific man would be treated. Never mind, our day will come. One day all the sciences shall bow the knee to us, for we are the real interpreters of the mysteries of nature."
I apologized for my impatience, which he gravely accepted, and then woke Simon from his sleep. "Where am I?" cried Simon. "Where have I been?"
"I can't tell," said the professor. "I wish I could, for then our work would be accomplished."
"Have you been a-waccinating me?" said Simon. The little man looked to me for explanation. "He calls everything mysterious by that name," I said. "'Cause," continued Simon, "I thought as how you waccinators or mesmerists made passes, as they call them, and waved your hands about, and like that."
"Did that Mr. Voltaire, I think you call him, make passes?" asked the professor.
"He," said Simon, "he ain't no ordinary man. He's got dealings with old Nick, he have. He didn't come near me, nor touch me, and I was sleeping afore I could think of my grandmother."
"Just so. He is no ordinary man. He's a real student of psychology, he is. He's gone beyond the elements of our profession. I despise the foolish things which these quacks of mesmerism make Billy people do in order to please a gaping-mouthed audience. It is true I call myself a professor of mesmerism and clairvoyance, but it would be more correct to call me a practical psychologist. You'll attend to my wishes with regard to our friend, won't you? Good morning."
I will not try to describe how I passed the day. It would be wearisome to the reader to tell him how often I looked at my watch and thought of the precious hours that were flying. Neither will I speak of my hopes and fears with regard to this idea of finding Kaffar's whereabouts by means of clairvoyance. Suffice it to say, I was in a state of feverish anxiety when we drove up to the professor's door that night, about 9:30. We did not wait a minute before operations were commenced. Simon was again in a mesmeric sleep, or whatever the reader may be pleased to call it, in a few seconds after he had sat down. Von Virchow began by asking the same question he had asked in the morning.
"Do you see Kaffar the Egyptian?"
I waited in breathless silence for the answer. Simon heaved a deep sigh and peered warily around, while the professor kept his eyes steadily upon him.
"Do you see Kaffar the Egyptian?" repeated he.
"Yes, I see him," said Simon at length.
"Where?"
"That's what I'm trying to find out," said Simon. "The place is strange. The people talk in a strange tongue. I can't make 'em out."
"What do you see now?"
said the professor, touching his forehead.
"Oh, I see now. said Simon. "It's a railway station, and I see that 'ere Willin there, just as cunning as ever. He's a-getting in the train, he is." "Can you see the name of the station?" "No, I can't. It's a biggish place, it is, and I can't see no name. Stay a minute, though. I see now." "Well, what's the name?" "It's a name as I never see or heard tell on before. B-O-L-O. Ah, that's it. Bologna, that's it. It's a queer name, though, ain't it?" "Well, what now?" "Why, he's in the train, and it's started, it is." "Do you know where he's going?" "No." "But he has a ticket. Can't you see it?" "Course I can't. It's in his pocket, and I can't see through the cloth, I can't." "And what's he doing now?" "Why, he's in for making hisself comfortable, he is. He's got a pillar, and he's stretching hisself on the seat and laying his head on the pillar. There, he's closed his eyes. He's off to sleep." The professor turned to me. "I'm afraid we can do no more tonight," he said. "Evidently he is on a journey, and we must wait until he arrives at his destination." "But can't Slowden remain as he is and watch him?" "The thing would be at once cruel and preposterous, sir. No, you must come again in the morning then. Perchance he will have finished his journey." And accordingly he proceeded to wake Simon. After all, it did not matter so much. It was now 10 o'clock, and I could do nothing that night in any case. "I do not know but that I am glad that things are as they are," continued the professor. "This second sleep will enable him to see more clearly to-morrow. Meanwhile, consider yourself fortunate. If the Egyptian stops anywhere in Italy, it will be possible for you to reach him and bring him back within the time you mention. Take heart, my friend. Goodbye for the time. I shall expect you early to-morrow." No sooner were we in the street than Simon began to ask me what he had told me, for I found that he was entirely ignorant of the things he had said. "Who'd have thought it?" he said musingly, when I told him. "Who'd have thought as how I should assist in a waccinating business like this 'ere? Tell 'ee, yer honour, I shall believe in ghosts and sperits again soon. Fancy me a seeing things in Italy, and telling to you without knowing anything about it. Well, but 'twill be grand if we can find 'em, yer honour, won't it then?" I spent a sleepless night harassed by 1,000 doubts and fears. There, in the quiet of my room, all this mesmerism and clairvoyance seemed only so much hocus-pocus, which no sensible and well-educated man should have anything to do with. Still, it was my only hope, and it only wanted 8 days till Christmas Eve. Only 1 little week and a day. That was all, and then, if I did not produce Kaffar, all was lost. It would be no use to go to Miss Forrest's house in Kensington and tell her that Simon Slowden had, while in a mesmeric sleep, seen Kaffar in Italy. No, no, that would never do. I must produce him. Nothing else would suffice. We were early at the professor's the following morning, and found him waiting and almost as anxious as we were. Again Simon submitted to the influence of the little man, and soon answered his questions far more readily than he had hitherto done. "Did he see Kaffar?" "Yes," was the reply. "Where is he now?" "He was in a beautiful town. The houses were white, the streets were white, the town was full of squares, and in these squares were many statues." Such was Simon's information. "Do you know what country the town is in?" "No," said Simon, shaking his head. "Could you not by any means find out? There's a railway station in the town. Can you not see the name there?" "Yes, there's a railway station, a fine one. Ah, I see the name now. Torino. Torino, that's it." "Torino!" I cried. "Turin! That's a town in Italy, some distance behind the French border." The professor beckoned me to be quiet. "Kaffar is at Torino, is he?" said the professor. "That's it, yes." "What is he doing?" "Talking with a man who keeps in a hotel." What does he say? It's in a foreign language, and I can't tell. Can you repeat what he said? It sounded like Je resté ici pour quelques jours. But I can't make out what it means. The professor turned to me. He's speaking French. I did not know Kaffar knew French. Perhaps he's learned it lately. The words mean that he will stay there for some days. Can you describe the street in which this hotel is? Continued von Virchow. Simon began to describe, but we could make nothing of it. We can't understand, replied the professor. Can you draw a sketch of the road to it from the railway station? And he put a piece of paper and pencil in Simon's hand. Without hesitating, Simon drew a sketch, a facsimile of which is given on the opposite page. I had been in Turin, and remembered some of the places the sketch indicated. It might be far from perfect, but it was sufficient for me. It would be child's play to find Kaffar there. That will do, I said to the professor. I'll start at once. Thank you so much. Ah, that will do, will it? He said with a smile. Then I'll wake up this man. Simon woke up as usual, rubbing his eyes, and asked whether any good had been done. Everything's been done, cried I. Come, Professor, allow me to write you a cheque. How much shall it be? Not a penny until your work is accomplished, replied the little man with dignity. That is not fair, I said. I don't know what may happen, and you must not be defrauded. Anyhow, here's something on account, and I put a 20-pound note in his hand. He smiled as he looked at it, while I took my hat and stated my intention to start for Turin at once. Begging your pardon, said Simon, but this here vaccination business is awfully wearying, and I should like to, that is... The very thing, I replied, anticipating his request. You shall go with me. Half an hour later we were at Gower Street, making preparations for our journey to Turin. Simon calm and collected, I feverish and excited. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Weapons of Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carl Henning. Weapons of Mystery by Joseph Hocking. Chapter 18. Nearing the End. There were, as I said, 8 days in which to find Kaffar and bring him to London, counting the day on which we started our journey. It was Wednesday. By the following Wednesday at midnight I must prove to Gertrude that Voltaire was a villain and a liar. It should be done easily. It was but little more than a 30-hours ride to Turin, that is, provided everything went smoothly. To put it at the outside, it was only a 48-hours journey, allowing time for a sleep on the way. Thus 4 days would suffice for travelling, and I should have more than 3 days in which to find Kaffar. It was true, Turin was a large town, but in the 3 days I was sure I could find him. In that time I thought I could hunt every lodging-house and hotel in the city. I shall say little of the journey. Mostly it was cold and wearisome enough. From Dover to Paris it was fairly comfortable, but from Paris to the Italian border we were travelling through a snowstorm, and thus, when we came to this our last stopping place before going through the famous Mount Cenis tunnel, we were 4 hours late. It was terribly cold there. Everything was ice-bound. Brooklets, waterfalls, rivers, all were held fast by the Ice King. Simon was much impressed by the scenery. The great giant mountains towering up on every hand were a revelation to him, and he stood open-mouthed, gazing at what is perhaps among the grandest sights in France. We swept through Mount Cenis tunnel, and then, with a cry of gladness, we entered the sunny land of Italy. What a change it was! Here the warm sun, which had been hidden on the other side by the high mountain range, had melted the snow, and so bright streams of water came rushing down the mountain sides, laughing as if in glee.
The cottagers sat outside their doors, singing in the sun. The vine-covered hills, although not yet clothed with their green garment, were still beautiful, while away in the distance spread a broad Italian plain, dotted with villages, out of whose midst a modest church spire ever lifted its head. I had seen all this before, but to Simon it was a marvel of beauty. In England the streets were muddy and a yellow fog hung over London, and yet in 48 hours we were beneath sunny skies. We were breathing a comparatively humid air. But I must not stay to write about this, for my story is not about Italian scenery or beautiful sights of any sort. It is my work now to tell about my search after Kaffar. We arrived in Turin on Friday evening, about 51 hours from the time we started from London. We had spent some little time in Paris, or we could have done it more quickly. We found Turin lit up with a pure, bright light, and, as Simon declared, looking one of the most purtiest places like as ever he'd clapped his eyes on. We stayed at Hotel Trombetta. We had several reasons for doing this. First, it was a good hotel. I had stayed there before, and so I knew. It was also near the station, and fairly near the place where, according to Simon's sketch, Kaffar was staying. We got into the hotel just in time for dinner. Simon declared that he daren't go into the dining room among the smells like. It would take away his appetite, just like vaccination did. But as I insisted, he gave way, and certainly did not draw anyone's attention by his awkwardness. I had got him a perfectly fitting suit of clothes in Paris, in which he looked a respectable member of society. Directly after dinner I went out to try to find Kaffar's whereabouts, but although Turin is beautifully built and the streets very straight, I found I had to put off my search until morning. Every hour of waiting was, as the reader may imagine, of great anxiety to me. I was now making my great move. If I missed in this, all was lost. Was Kaffar in Turin? Was he, or had he been there? Was all this mesmerism so much hocus-pocus and nonsense to deceive me, a credulous fool? And yet I was sure Simon would not be a party in deceiving me. But might not I have been deceived by the professor? Could he not make my friend say not what really existed, but what existed in his own mind? And yet the little man seemed honest. Anyhow, I could do no more, and it was my only hope. There could be no harm in trying. If I failed, well, I could not help it. I had done my best. I would go back and face Voltaire and Miss Forrest, and, well, I knew not what. But if I found the Egyptian, it was too good to be true. I dared not dwell upon the thought. It was not for me to build castles in the air and weave bright fancies, but to work until I had accomplished the work I had set out to do. And so I went quietly to bed, and, much to my astonishment, slept long and soundly. The sun was shining in at my window when I woke, and this Italian city looked wondrously beautiful as it lay there this clear December morning in the light of the bright sun. We wasted no time after breakfast before setting out. I with beating heart, Simon still calm and collected, looking with critical eyes on the sketch he had drawn in his mesmeric sleep. "After all," remarked Simon slowly, "it shows us how a feller can live away from his body, don't it, then? We are fearfully and terribly made, as Solomon said to the people on Mount Sinai." I did not reply to Simon's philosophy, nor to his wonderful scriptural quotations. I was too anxious to get to this hotel, where I hoped Kaffar would be staying. We came to the great square in which stood the palace of the king, but I paid no heed to the imposing building, nor to the magnificently carved monuments that stood around in the square. I was too anxious to turn down the street in which my hopes lay. I went slowly down, till I came to the bottom of it, where a narrow road branched off, leading to a kind of observatory, but I saw nothing of an hotel. My heart became like lead. Simon's sketch of the streets had not been a false one. If any of my readers have been to Turin, they will remember the long street leading from the station. They will also recognize the two squares which Simon indicated in his plan. True, he had sketched them out of proportion, while the street was far more straight than he had drawn it. Still, it bore a close resemblance to that particular part of the city. But there was no hotel, nor sign of one in the street. We walked up and down again and again with no success. Could it be that I had come all these weary miles again only for a bitter and terrible disappointment? The thought almost drove me mad. I would not give up, however. There might be no hotel, but it was possible Kaffar stayed in a lodging house, or even in a private house. I would knock at every house in the street and make inquiries before I would give up. The Italian language was not altogether strange to me. I could not by any means speak it fluently, but I knew it enough to enter into an ordinary conversation. So, seeing a soldier pass up the street, I saluted him and asked him whether he knew a lodging house or private boarding establishment in the street. No, the soldier said. He did not know any at all in that street, or indeed in that part of the town. But if I would go with him, he would direct me to a splendid place, marvellously convenient, marvellously clean, and marvellously cheap, and, best of all, kept by his mother's sister. I cannot say I felt either elated or depressed by this answer. Evidently this was a keen youth, trying to get a suitable customer for his relations. Another youth came up to me soon after, offering to sell me photographs of some of the principal sights in Turin. Could he tell me of any boarding or lodging establishment in the street? Yes, he knew of 3 or 4. For a franc, he would give me their history and lead me to them. Was there one about the middle of the street? Yes, there were 2 close together. Should he take me? I closed with the youth's offer, and accordingly we walked down the street together. He entered a tobacconist's shop, assuring me that this was a lodging house. A young Italian girl stood behind the counter as if waiting for an order, so I asked to see the proprietor of the place. She immediately went out of the shop and gave a shout, and a minute after a matronly woman entered, about 50 years of age, and who, from her close resemblance to the dark-eyed girl, was probably her mother. Was she the proprietor of this establishment? She was. Did she keep a boarding house? She did. For well-behaved people. She had no husband? The Blessed Virgin had taken him home. And a man did not conduct her business? Certainly not. She was a capable woman, able to attend to the wants of her guests, while her daughter was a universal favorite because of the politeness to customers and the good tobacco she sold. Should she have the pleasure of selling me some? I did not reply except for a smile, which this Italian maiden evidently took for an assent to her mother's proposition, and accordingly proceeded to make some cigarettes for me. Meanwhile, her mother assured me that her house was convenient and comfortable, and asked permission to show me some vacant rooms, and give me an idea of the attendance I should receive. I accordingly followed her, and found rooms which, while not altogether according to my English tastes, did her credit. "Have you many lodgers now?" I asked. 4, was the reply. "Gentlemen?" "All gentlemen." "Might I ask their nationality?" I said. "They are all Italian," was the reply. My hopes had risen high, but they were by this answer dashed to the ground. Then I remembered that Simon had described Kaffar as being in a room with a man. So, after thanking the lady for her kindness, and paying for the cigarettes, I asked the boy, who was waiting for his franc, to show me to the other lodging-house close by. "Oh, sir," said the proprietress of this establishment, "don't go there. It's a bad house. It really is. The lodgers are bad men, and they are bad people." She said this evidently in earnest, while the little girl behind the counter hoped I should not go among those thieves. I was not displeased at this. I did not think Kaffar would be very particular as to his society, and he would be more likely to stay at this disreputable place than a respectable lodging-house. Accordingly, I told the good lady that I should not take lodgings there, and if I took apartments in any place in the city, hers should have the first consideration. This considerably mollified her, so my guide proceeded to lead the way to the other lodging-house. This was also a tobacconist's shop. but a dirty old woman stood behind the counter. She was very polite, however, and quickly called down the proprietor of the establishment. This was a lodging house, was it not? He assured me that my surmise was correct, and forthwith began to enumerate the advantages received by those who were fortunate enough to be received as lodgers. "Have you many lodgers at this present?" I asked. "5," was the reply. My heart began to beat violently now, for I felt I was near the time when my labours would be rewarded by success, or I should have to give up my search in despair. "Are they all Europeans?" I asked. "No, there was one Turk, one Frenchman, 2 Italians, and 1 Egyptian." My heart gave a great bound. Surely I had been guided aright. I should find him at last. "Are they at home during the day?" "No," was the reply. "They are mostly out." "But they come home at night?" "Yes, they come home at night, all except one." "Which was he?" "The Egyptian." "Did he stay at home during the day?" "He really could not say. He only came a little more than 2 days ago, and his habits seemed uncertain." "And is the Egyptian at home now?" "No," said the man, eyeing me keenly. "Might I ask when he will be home?" I asked eagerly. "I do not think it right to answer questions about my lodgers," said the man sharply. "You have asked a great many. I must know your reasons for so doing before I answer any more." I began to chide myself for my folly. I had raised suspicions, and now I might not be able to get the information I wanted. "I did not intend to be offensive," I said. "If I mistake not, this Egyptian gentleman is acquainted with a man in England whom I know, and I have a message of great importance to convey." "To Mr. Kaffar's advantage?" asked the Italian eagerly. No words can express what I felt as the man unthinkingly uttered Kaffar's name. I had not come on a false report. The Egyptian bore the name of the man I wanted to find. "He can turn it to his advantage," I replied. "Mr. Kaffar is not in Turin at present," he said confidentially. "Could you tell me where he is?" I said, with beating heart. "I cannot. You see," and the Italian put his face close to mine. "Might I ask if you are somewhat of a gentleman fond of play?" I did not reply. "Ah, I thought so," said he, cunningly. "At first I was afraid you were a detective fellow, but I see now. Well, you will perhaps know that Mr. Kaffar is a very accomplished gentleman, and he left yesterday afternoon for a little tour. Where, I don't know. Another accomplished gentleman went with him. We have a jolly house, and you Englishmen would enjoy a few nights here. Come up tonight and win some of our Italian gold." "When will Mr. Kaffar be back?" "He said he might be back on Monday night, on Tuesday morning at latest." "I daren't come and play till he comes," I said. "Will he let you know when he is coming back?" "Yes, he said he'd telegraph." "Would you mind letting me know the train? I'm staying at the Hotel Trombetta." Yes, I shall be delighted. And then, when he comes, But what name shall I write on my message?" "Herod Voltaire," I said. I went away then and began to think. I found the man, and yet I had not. Nothing was certain yet. It was now Saturday, and he would not return until Monday night or Tuesday morning, and I must be in London by Wednesday at midnight, or all was lost. Say he came back on Tuesday by noon. There would then be only 36 hours left in which to get to London. 36 hours, and many hundreds of dreary, weary miles between. Or if he should not come at all, if the Italian were deceiving me. I shall not try and relate what happened the next 2 days, except to say that I set Simon to watch every train that came into Turin station, while I did all I could to discover whether he were hiding in Turin. Neither of us saw Kaffar, nor did we hear anything of him. Monday night came. I had received no message from the lodging-house keeper, neither had I heard any news. The suspense was becoming terrible. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and no news. "Simon," I said, "go to that lodging-house and ask whether any message has been received." The willing fellow, still with a smile on his face and a cheery look, started to do my bidding. I do not know how I should have borne up those 2 terrible days but for my faithful friend. He had not been gone above half a minute before he came bounding back to my room. "A message just a come, yer honour," he said. Eagerly I snatched it and read, "Expect me home tonight by the midnight train. Kaffar." I caught up a timetable and anxiously scanned it. The telegram was from Nice. There was a train due from this fashionable seaport at 12:30. The lodging-house keeper had kept his word, and Kaffar would be safe. It was become intensely real, intensely exciting. 5 hours to wait. 5 hours. Only those who have felt as I did can know what they meant. At 12 o'clock I sent Simon to the station, while I went to the lodging-house to await Kaffar's arrival. "Mr. Kaffar will have supper, I suppose?" I said to the proprietor of the house. "Yes, I shall prepare supper." "Where?" "In his room." "Just so. Could you manage to put me in a room where I can see him at supper without being observed? I should like to enter quietly and give him a surprise." "You mean nothing wrong?" "On my honour, I do not." "It is said," mused the Italian, "that an English gentleman's honour is like English cloth. It can always be depended on. The adjoining room is empty, sir." "Thank you," I replied, while he led the way to the room. I had not been there long before I had heard some one enter with the landlord. The 2 rooms, like many we find in French hotels, could easily be made one, as a doorway led from one to the other. I had arranged my door to be slightly ajar, so was able to see. The man with the landlord was Kaffar. I found that Kaffar could not speak Italian. He spoke French enough to make himself understood, and as his host was proficient in that language, French was the tongue in which they conversed. "Has anyone been asking for me?" asked Kaffar. "Yes, sir." "Who?" "A gentleman from England." "From England? What kind of man?" "A giant with brown hair." "A giant with brown hair. Man, where is he now?" "How can I say?" said the Italian. Kaffar held down his head for a minute, and then said hastily, "And his message?" "Something to your advantage, sir." "My advantage? Can it be he? Did he give his name?" "Herod Voltaire." "Voltaire! Never! He dare not come near me. I'm his master for many reasons. He dare not come. But—" He checked himself, as if he were telling the Italian too much. The host then left the room, while Kaffar went on with his supper. I opened the door noiselessly and went into the room and said distinctly, "Good evening, Mr. Kaffar." He looked up and saw me. Never, I think, did I see so much terror, astonishment, mingled with hate, expressed on a human face before. He made a leap for the door. I caught him and held him fast. "No, Mr. Kaffar, you must not escape," I said, leading him back to his chair. "You cannot kill me here," he gasped. "I mean no wrong to you. You followed me for revenge. For an answer, I went to the door and locked it." "Have mercy," he said. "Don't kill me. You don't know all. Voltaire's your enemy, not I." "You knew I was following you, did you?" I said. "Yes. Voltaire said you were mad for my life, that you swore to be revenged, that you would pull me limb from limb. Ah, you do not know." Surely I had found out the man's nature. He was a coward, and stood in deadly fear of me. He had been Voltaire's tool, who had frightened him to do his every bidding. Now I must use his fear of me to make him do my will. "Well, I have found you out," I said. "You thought you would master me, didn't you? Well, I'm master of you both. Voltaire's influence over me is gone, and now he is in my power, while you— Ah, Mr. Blake, have mercy," he whined. I only did what he told me, and he has treated me like a dog. Yes, he intended me to kill you, while both of you tried to ruin me. Curse him! I know he did. Oh, I am not his friend now, Mr. Blake. Forgive me. I felt that if I allowed this man to think my welfare depended on his doing my will, he would defy me. I must use means suitable to the man. Kafar, I said, had I a heart like you Egyptians, you know what I should do. But, well, I will be merciful on one condition. Oh, what? What? That you will come back to England with me at once. I cannot, I dare not. He has promised to take my life blood if I do. No harm shall happen to you, I promise. You will not allow him to touch me? He shall not. Then I will go. My point was gained. The man had promised to accompany me willingly, while I had expected a difficult matter in getting him to England. Early the next day we were on our way to England, Simon and I taking turns in watching the wily Egyptian. End of chapter 18. Recording by Carl Henning. Chapter 19 of Weapons of Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carl Henning. Weapons of Mystery by Joseph Hocking. Chapter 19. The Second Christmas Eve. The skies were clear when we left Turin, and the air pure and free. We had not gone far into France, however, when we found everything changed. It was snow everywhere. On ordinary occasions I should not have minded much, but now everything depended on my getting to London at a certain hour. How slowly the train seemed to creep, to be sure, and how long we stopped at the little roadside stations. Simon did his best to cheer me, while Kafar furtively watched us both, as if in fear. I was silent and fearful, for I felt sure the Egyptian meditated escape. The laughter of the light-hearted French people, who were preparing for Christmas festivities, grated on my ears, for, although I had succeeded almost beyond my hopes, a great fear rested upon me that I should fail even yet. Especially was this realized when I knew that our train was hours late. And I knew that did we not arrive in Paris at something like reasonable time, we should miss the express trains for England. When we got to the French metropolis, we were nearly 5 hours late. It was not to be wondered at, for the snow fell in blinding drifts, until, in some cases, the railways were completely blocked. The wonder was how we got to Paris so soon, when we considered what had to be contended with. Anxiously I inquired after trains by which I could catch the boats for England, but the replies were vague. First, it was now Christmas Eve, which at all times caused the general traffic to be delayed, and second, the weather was so bad that to state times of arrival was impossible. It was now Wednesday morning, and I started from Paris with 16 hours before me in which to get to London. Ordinarily I should have had time enough and to spare, but everything was delayed and confused. I had thought of going back by Dieppe and Newhaven, but a storm was blowing, and I knew that meant a longer sea passage. So I went to Calais, thus riding through one of the most uninteresting parts of France. It was 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve when we arrived at this little French seaport, and then it took us 2 hours to cross the straits, although we happened to be on one of the fast-sailing steamers. We had now 5 hours to get to Kensington. I was getting terribly anxious now. If there should be a breakdown, or if anything should happen to hinder us, we were so near and yet so far. Once I thought of telegraphing and telling of my success, but I refrained from that. I wanted to tell of my victory in person, and thus, if needs be, destroy Voltaire's last hope. The usual time for an express train to run from Dover to Victoria is about 2 hours, but it was Christmas Eve, Special trains were running, and passengers crowded on every hand. Thus we were more than 3 hours in accomplishing the journey. The train swept into Victoria at 10:15. There was 1 hour and 3/4 to go to Kensington. "This way to the Custom House," shouted one of the officials. I had forgotten this part of the programme, but I determined not to wait for my luggage. I would sooner lose it 1,000 times over than be late in reaching Kensington. I accordingly got the keys from Kaffar and Simon, and pointing out the portmanteau to an official, gave him a sovereign to see them examined and sent on to my address in Gower Street. I hailed a hansom, but the cabby refused to take the 3 of us, upon which Kaffar offered to go in another, but I dared not risk him out of my sight. So we got into a rumbling old four-wheeler, and I offered the cabby a sovereign if he would get me at the address I gave him in half an hour. "Couldn't do it for 10 sovereigns, sir," said the cabby. "The street's as slippery as glass, and as crowded as herrings in a barrel. I'll do it in 3/4 for a quid, your honour."
It was now nearly 10:30. That would make it 11:15. To me it was drawing it terribly fine, but I consented. If he were not spurred on by thought of reward, short as the distance was, there was no knowing how long he would be.
At length the cab stopped. It was 11:15, and as I got out, I noticed that we stood in front of one of those tall, noble-looking mansions which are so common in Kensington. "Wait a minute," I said to the cabby. "I want to be certain this is the right house." Meanwhile, I noticed that my constant friend Simon held Kaffar by the arm. I rang the bell violently, and a servant appeared at the door. "Did Miss Gertrude Forrest live there?" "Yes." "Was she at home?" "Yes." "Could I see her?" The servant was not sure, but would ascertain. Miss Forrest was then engaged. I stopped the man, for I did not wish to appear in the way that matters seemed to promise. Meanwhile Simon had paid the cabby, and so the 3 of us stood together in the hall. "I am an old friend of Miss Forrest's," I said to the man. "I want to be shown to the room where she is, without her being apprised of my presence." "I daren't," he replied. "It would be as much as my place is worth." "No, it would not," I replied. "You would not suffer in the slightest degree." "But there are several people in the room," he said, eyeing a sovereign I was turning over in my hand. "How many?" "There's Miss Forrest, her aunt, and Miss Staggles, besides a gentleman that came in early this evening." "That gentleman's name is Herr Voltaire," I said. "Yes, sir, that's the name." "Well, I'll do as you wish me." I followed the servant, while Simon kept fast hold on Kaffar. The man knocked at the door, while I stood close behind him, and the moment he opened the door I entered the room. Never shall I forget the sight. Evidently Voltaire had been claiming the fulfilment of her promise, for he was earnestly speaking when I entered, while Miss Forrest, pale as death, sat by an elderly lady, who I concluded to be her aunt. Miss Staggles also sat near, as grim and taciturn as ever. "It's nearly 12 o'clock," I heard Voltaire say, "and he's not here. He dare not come. How dare he? He has left the country, and will never return again." "But I am here," I said distinctly. They all turned as I spoke, and Miss Forrest gave a scream. I had been travelling incessantly for 40 hours, so I am afraid I did not present a very pleasant appearance. No doubt I was travel-stained and dusty enough. "Who are you?" demanded Voltaire. "You know well enough who I am," I said. "Begone!" he cried. "This is no place for murderers." "No," I said, "it's not." No sooner had Miss Forrest realized who I was than she rushed to my side. "Oh, are you safe? Are you safe?" she said huskily. I looked at her face, and it was deathly pale, while her eyes told me she had passed sleepless nights. "No, he's not safe," said Voltaire, "and he shall pay for this with his life." "Is it manly," I said to him, "to persecute a lady thus? Can't you see how she scorns you, hates you, loathes you? Will you insist on her abiding by a promise which was made in excitement to save an innocent man?" "Innocent!" he sneered, and I noticed the look of victory still in his glittering eye. "Innocent! Yes, as innocent as Nero or Robespierre. But you shall not come here to pollute the air by your presence. Begone, before I forget myself and send for the police to lock you up. Ah, I long for vengeance on the man who murdered my dear friend." "Then you will not release Miss Forrest?" "Never." "Then I shall make you." "You make me?" he cried savagely. Meanwhile, Miss Forrest had clung trembling to my arm. Miss Forrest's aunt had looked fearfully, first at Voltaire, then at me, while Miss Staggles had been mumbling something about showing me out of doors. "Yes," I said, "I shall make you." "You cannot," he jeered. "I have it in my power now to lodge you safe in a felon's gaol, and bring you to a hangman's noose." "Ay, and I would too," cried Miss Staggles. "You are too kind, too forbearing, Mr. Voltaire." "Oh, leave me!" cried Miss Forrest, clinging closer to me. "I will suffer anything rather than you should be. "Ring the bell for a servant," I said, and Miss Forrest's aunt, trembling, touched a button close beside her. The man who had showed me in immediately answered the summons. "Show my friends in," I said. A minute more, and Simon entered, carefully leading Kaffar. Voltaire gave a yell like that of a mad dog, while Miss Forrest gave a scream of delight. "There, villain," I said, "is the man whom you say I've murdered." "How dare you come here?" said Voltaire to Kaffar. "Because I brought him," I said, "to save this lady and expose you. Now where is your power? Where are the charges you have brought?" Had he a pistol, I believe he would have shot me dead. His ground was cut from under him. The man who destroyed his every hope stood before us all, and refuted his terrible charges. For a minute he stood as if irresolute. Then he turned to Miss Forrest and spoke as coolly as if nothing had happened. "May I claim your pardon, your forgiveness?" he said. "Believe me, lady, it was all because I loved you that I have acted as I have. Say then now that all is against me, that you forgive me." She hesitated a minute before replying. Then she said slowly, "It is difficult for me to speak to you without shuddering. Never did I believe such villainy possible. But I pray that God may forgive you as I do." "Then I will leave you," he said, with a terrible look at me. "No," I said, "you will not leave us so easily. Know, man, that you are punishable by the law of England." "How?" "You are guilty of many things that I need not enumerate here. Some Kaffar has told me about, some I knew before. So instead of my lying in a felon's cell, it will be you." Then we all received a great shock. Miss Staggles arose from her chair and rushed towards me. "No, no, Mr. Blake," she cried. "No, not for my sake. He's my only son. For my sake, spare him." "Your only son? Yours?" cried Miss Forrest's aunt. "Mine," cried this gaunt old woman. "Oh, I was married on the Continent when quite a girl, and I dared not tell of it, for my husband was a gambler and a villain, but he was handsome and fascinating, and so he won me. Herod, this son of mine, was born just the day before his father was killed in a duel. Oh, spare him for my sake." I need not enter into the further explanations she made, nor how she pleaded for mercy for him, for they were painful to all. And did I spare him? Yes, on condition that he left England, never to return again, besides stipulating for Kaffar's safety. He left the house soon after. We all felt a sense of relief when he had gone, save Miss Staggles, or rather Miss Voltaire, who went up to her room weeping bitterly. Need I relate what followed that night? Need I tell you how I had to recount my doings and journeyings over again and again, while Simon and Kaffar were asked to give such information as I was unable to give, and how one circumstance was explained by another until all was plain? I will not tax my readers' patience by so doing. This must be left to their own imagination. After this, Miss Walters insisted that we must have refreshments, and bustled away to order it, while a servant conducted Simon and Kaffar to a room where food was to be obtained, and so I was left alone with the woman I loved. "Well?" I said, when they were gone. "Well," she replied, looking shyly into my face. "I have done your bidding," I said, after a minute's silence. "I have freed you from that man." "Thank God you have," she said with a shudder. "Oh, if you only knew how I have prayed and hoped and thought." "And I had promised too," I said. "Will it be painful for you to keep?" "Painful, Justin!" she cried. "You know I will gladly be your wife." I will not write of what happened then. It is not for the eyes of the world to see. Tears come into my eyes now as I remember how her new-found happiness lit up her eyes with joy, and how the colour came into her beautiful cheeks. God alone knows how happy we were. We had been kept asunder by a cruel hand, and had been brought together again by long and bitter struggles which would never have been but for the love of God and the love in our hearts. Then, when our joy was fullest, a choir from a neighbouring church began to sing, "Christians awake, salute the happy morn, whereon the Saviour of mankind was born." It was indeed a happy Christmas morn to us. The darkness had rolled away, and the light of heaven shone upon us. When I left shortly after, I asked whether I should come the next day, or rather when daylight came, and spend Christmas Day with her. "You must not be later than 9 o'clock," she said with a glad laugh, while my heart seemed ready to break for joy. I have nearly told my story now. The loving work of months is almost at an end, and soon I must drop my pen. I am very happy, happier than I ever hoped to be. My new-found strength not only brought me freedom from my enemy, not only enabled me to accomplish my purpose, but gave me fuller and richer life. Gertrude and I live under brighter skies than we should do had I not been led through so terrible an experience. Thus the eternal goodness brings good out of evil. Voltaire is on the Continent. I do not think that he has ever returned to England, while his mother, who still lives the same kind of life as of yore, supplies him with money. It appears that she has means which were unknown to her friends, and thus she keeps him supplied. Of course, the relationship between them explains their being in league in Yorkshire. She was ever seeking to serve him then. She is still trying to do the same. She never speaks to me, but for me, she says, her son would have married Gertrude, and then she would have lived with her Herod, who would have been a country gentleman, not the poor outcast he is now. Kaffar has gone back to Egypt. He stayed in London a few days after the scene on Christmas Eve, and I gave him house room in my old lodgings. But he tired of England, so I sent him back to Cairo. I think he is a far better man than he was, but I am not at all sorry that he dislikes England. He writes sometimes, but I never receive his letters without thinking of the terrible night on the Yorkshire moors, of the dark waters, the red hand, and the terrible struggle. Although I am now entirely free from any such influences, I cannot help fearfully wondering at the awful power one being can exert over another. How an evil man could almost deplete me of my own self, and make me see according to his will and act according to his desires, is to me beyond explanation. Truly does our greatest poet say, "We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded with a sleep." Tom Temple is married and lives happily at Temple Hall. Tom attributes all his happiness to the ghost. He should never have had the pluck to ask Edith Gray to be his wife, he says, had not his lady love been so fearful. "But you found no difficulty in getting her consent, Tom?" I said one day at Temple Hall. "Difficulty?" laughed Tom. "She said yes before I had stuttered out my little speech." "I couldn't bear to see you in such an agony of pain," blushingly replied his happy little wife. "Ah, well, Tom deserves his happiness because he makes those around him happy. Simon Slowden lives with Gertrude and me. He declared that he couldn't bear the idea of leaving us. after he'd gone through so much to bring us together. We are not sorry for this, for he has been an incalculable help to me in many ways. But for him, perhaps, I should never have the treasure I now possess, the truest and noblest wife God ever gave to man. But for him, I might have dragged out my weary life, disappointed and almost broken-hearted. Of course, this might not be so, but I know that Simon was one of my greatest helpers in making me the happiest man on earth. I will close my story with a secret. Yesterday, Simon came to me looking very grave. "If I remember aright, your honour," he said, "I told you as I'd completely finished with all belonging to the female persuasion." "You did, Simon." "Well, I've changed my mind. I used to think after that waccinating business give me smallpox that I was done for. But there Emily, the housemaid, have been waccinated, and she have had smallpox too. Well, seems to me as how it must have been special providence as have brought us together, as we read in the book of Job, and not liking to go 'gin Providence, I axed her to change her name to Slowden." "Well, Simon, what was her reply?" "She seed the force of my resonance in a minute, and so, as you may say, there'll be good brought out of evil, even the evil of waccinating, for it's given us both smallpox, and we both live. Our faces be a bit pitty, but kisses ain't none the less sweet for that." "And when is it to come off, Simon?" "I'm going to the registrar's now, your honour, so 3 weeks to-morrow I shall be took in and done for, and all through waccination." The end. End of chapter 19. Recorded by Carl Henning. End of Weapons of Mystery by Joseph Hocking.